This is Clark the Knife, and this is the Serge Slip 7. Going to go through my reviews in 3 parts now. First, I'm going to go through the specifications on this page here. Then we are going to shift over to an overview of the knife's features, as well as pro, neutral, and cons about this knife. And then finally, I'm introducing what I am calling the ClarkeScore. If you're a car fan, it is a blatant ripoff of Doug DeMuro's DougScore. It's in V1 right now. Let's see how it goes, where I'm going to try to score this knife compared to some of the 600 knives I've handled over the years. I think it'll be a little bit more helpful. It'll help things move a little faster. Let's get into it. So, this Serge Slip 7, this came out earlier this year, maybe it came out last year, comes up every once in a while. Serge is Serge Panchenko, a relatively well-known knife maker. He is known both for his custom and his production work. The custom knife that's been getting a lot of buzz recently is his Rook, which really looks like absolutely nothing else out there. He's also known for his little coin knives, coin claws. They are these tiny little circular knives that have a little claw that folds out. He's got little beans that are like this big, little detent, double detent flippers. He's got a bunch of slip joints. He's got custom knives. He's got production knives. He's got watches. He does all sorts of stuff. And he's got this consistent aesthetic, which you really see mostly on this blade here, where everything is acid wash and everything has sort of an organic feel to it. I feel like if you're a gamer, I feel like this would be pulled out like Metro 2033 or something like that, or you're a fan of Russian fiction. But anyway, this is one of Serge's more recent production slip joints. He's been doing these for some years now. This one was made for him in China, so CHN, by Real Steel. We'll get into that later. Your blade here is 2.7 inches long. Your whole knife here is 6.375 inches long. I don't have a scale on me right now. This knife is definitely less than 2.3 ounces. I think 2.3 ounces for the titanium version. Frankly, I think this carbon fiber version is almost certainly less than 2 ounces, and it very much feels it. Your blade thickness here is 0.11 inches, so 11 thousandths, and then this blade right here is M390. Now, as many of you know, Chinese-made M390 is sometimes great and sometimes not so great, and we will get into that. And then price, of course. Price right here, $150. And these originally were only sold through Serge's own site. Basically, you'll see Serge. If you see Serge Knife Co., that is the brand that he uses. You can see there the M390, and these are numbered. Serge Knife Co. is what Serge uses for his production models, while he just calls, it's got his own maker's mark for his custom models. These have principally been available through Serge's own website. You can find on his Instagram and things like that. It's not that hard to find. And then they've started to trickle into retailers. I'm not sure this particular version might have only been available through Serge's site directly. I could be wrong, but most of the ones I've seen at retailers have been the titanium handles and things like that. And he used to do a version of this with G10 handles. Let's get into, those are your specifications. Let's get into the features of the knife. So, this is a slip joint, as the name would lead you to believe, the Slip 7. That means this is not a locking knife. There is nothing right now that prevents this knife from closing. It's got a half stop, as you'd expect from a modern slip joint, and a pretty nice walk and talk, pretty strong pull. If you remember when I reviewed the Slip 5, that had a weak pull. That was intentional because there was so little blade to access. Here, because of this big fat sheep's foot blade, you've got more to pull on, and so he was able to give it a stronger pull. And it's very satisfying because of that. So you've got 2 slabs of Nebula carbon fiber here. This is, I'm almost certain it's fat carbon. It's one of their resin-impregnated carbon fibers. I guess all carbon fiber is resin-impregnated, but it's got red, white, and blue features in here. I will tell you right up front, I'm not a big fan of fat carbon in general, and I'm definitely usually not a fan of Nebula, but it works really, really well here. I mean, it helps that it almost looks like a skull that I got on my version right there. It turned out really cool. But with this deeply acid wash blade and this pop of color and sort of the gloominess of all the darks there, aesthetically this works really nicely with this particular carbon fiber. Your blade here is a sheep's foot. You've got a gradual belly here, a very subtle belly, but there is some belly. You've got a swedge across the top. This thickness, again, 110 thousandths, is carried out about 2/3 of the way with a decent distal taper the rest of it. That swedge helps with that. Then you've got this acid wash finish on the blade, which is typical for Serge. No liners under the carbon fiber. You don't really need them, which contributes to this thing being so light. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this is like 1.5 ounces. Very minimal hardware. Frankly, you can even sort of lose the screws in the carbon fiber. You don't even notice them. Just 3 tiny little screws there, and then 1 screw there, 1 screw there, and then the 3rd screw on this side becomes one of the 2 pocket clip screws. A nice bent, probably steel, I don't know if that's steel or titanium pocket clip there. Nice little subtle lanyard hole. Again, just very nice in this particular configuration. One of the very interesting details is how he did the backspacer. So if I bring out, because I've still got it around, and didn't sell it yet, my the Slip 5 is like a typical slip joint, where you'll hear people talk about their slip joints being flush in 3 positions. So you see your back spring here is flush with the handles and flush with the top of the knife when it's open. It's also, when you get to the half stop, flush with the handles. And when you get closed, flush with the handles. That's flush in 3 positions for those of you that are new to slip joints. This back spring is completely not flush. Now, I checked. Mine is not messed up. They're all like this. For whatever reason, probably an aesthetic one, maybe a functional one, Serge has chosen to basically bend this backspacer down, and the backspacer actually sits fairly deep into the knife between the scales. Now, it is in fact consistent in that position. You can see from this end here how deep within the scales that backspacer sits. It is consistent in that position. It's just strange. I've never seen another slip joint like it. Now, I'm not a usual slip joint guy, but that is a very new detail to me. And even back here, it's slightly recessed. It's never flush with the scales. Again, knowing Serge doesn't do dumb design things. He has been doing this for years and years and years. There's either, I'm sure, a mechanical or maybe even an aesthetic reason for doing that. It's just very unusual. But overall, with this being a slip joint, it's a pretty simple design. You got a blade, you got a back spring, you've got 2 slabs of carbon fiber here, and you've got a clip with some light hardware. That's pretty much it. Very neutral handle design here. These are literally straight. You know, I talk a lot about how some neutral handles will taper subtly or something like that. This is straight. This is straight. I mean, if there's a taper, it's microscopic. Pretty even radius back here. Not too sharp, not too gradual. And then some sort of more gradual radii on the front here, which you can see more easily when it's closed. It's not even a consistent radius. It's, you know, these are the cool little details that Serge puts in, and the layering of the carbon fiber sort of sells the illusion. There's sort of one radius here, and then it flattens out a bit there. It just looks a little funky. Again, Serge's designs tend to look and feel sort of organic. It's really cool, given the layers of this carbon fiber, how you can sort of see that exposed line running through there even from the front, because there is a light chamfer all the way around the edges of these scales, though No chamfer on the interior. So the interior of the scale, to the extent you can feel it, is sharp. And again, there's your lanyard hole, and there's a little sort of indentation. This isn't really back spring, this is just back spacer back here. There's an indentation in the back spacer to accommodate that lanyard hole. Let's open this back up, and let's get to pros, neutrals, and negatives. Okay, and let's do that and do that. The biggest pro is the design. This is a Serge knife. Serge has raving fans. Serge has raving fans for a good reason. Serge knives look like nothing else out there. It's not just the acid wash finish he throws on everything. But again, there's almost a apocalyptic feels like too simplistic of a way to talk about it. I mean, it just sort of, it's just grungy. It looks almost like industrial in a way. Industrial in like the Godflesh and 9-inch nails sense of the term. Like something that just rolled out of a factory. But then you've got those very subtle organic lines. You can sort of see it more on something like the Slip 5, where you've got just, you know, more curves, there aren't that many sharp edges, and even when there are sharp edges, they're usually molded into curves, and the acid wash kind of hides everything. There's a little bit of that here too. It's just, Serge has a very distinctive aesthetic that carries through all of his knives, and I mean, things like this recessed backspacer are just interesting. I don't know the reason for it, but it's interesting. This doesn't look exactly like any other knife out there, especially slip joints, which tend to be either very retro or, in the case of something like a Jack Wolf knife, very sort of sleek and almost like futuristic at times. This has an aesthetic and a feel all its own, and that's cool. I'm going to say here the walk and talk is a very slight pro, and I'll go into why it's a slight pro later. The opening and closing action, especially early on when you first get this knife, is pretty solid. There's a really nice snap on the close. The fact that this is carbon fiber helps that. You probably just heard one of the issues right there, but it helps with those acoustics, and it's easy to grab onto this. There's sort of a ledge because of this sharp edge right here. You can pinch right there, get onto it easily, and there's enough resistance on the pull that there's a nice snappy half stop, nice snappy open. The walk and talk feels pretty good. And then the other one, and this is again a moderate positive, is going to be the carry. Like, this is the one that's really the big positive. These are kind of like only slightly positive. Frankly, I could easily push these two over into the neutral. The carry, the fact is, this is a super light knife, as you would expect for a slip joint with carbon fiber scales without liners. And even though it's a bit of a blocky design, and even though it's just like, there's nothing remarkable in its construction that makes it light, just the nature of the material means this is very small, very light, very easy to carry. I mean, folded up, it's like having a couple sticks of gum in your pocket. And it feels not that much heavier than a couple sticks of gum in your pocket. And that's pretty cool in and of itself. The neutral. I'm going to call the neutral the quirkiness. Things like that recessed backspacer, things like this acid washed everything aesthetic. As much as the design is a positive, and that's a positive for Serge fans, this aesthetic will not be for everybody, and in fact it's going to be very much not for some people. There is nothing that is refined, there's nothing that's sleek, there's nothing that even feels particularly high-end about Serge's knives. You know, Serge's customs are kind of, they're very interesting in the fact that even though they're made at an extremely high level of precision and quality, they don't look it. This is not made at that level of precision and quality, but it looks rough. In some ways that's very cool. In some ways that's just going to be off-putting to some people. The cons. The first con I'm going to get to, because it's the less big con. I'm not even going to say it's the less big. They're both pretty big. So, I said at the start, this is made by Real Steel in China. The fit and finish on this knife is not good. There are a couple major issues with this knife, and I'm not even going to go into the blade in detail yet. First off, there is absolutely play in this blade. There's play when it's open. There's a tiny bit of play, less at the half stop, and there's really bad play when it's closed. This wiggles all over the place when it's closed, and the worst part when it's closed, listen, it almost pains me to do that. But because there is a little bit of slop in the back spring when it's closed, what you just heard was this blade scraping against that back spring. And quite often, when you snap it shut, part of that snap you're hearing is actually the blade hitting against the back spring. And if you put any pressure on this knife or move it, it's like nails on a chalkboard, but also it's chewing up your blade edge. Like, simply, this knife, when it is closed, the blade runs into this backspacer and back spring. And that's a pretty, I understand that it's difficult to fit a blade that is this big, this tall. Sheep's feet are always relatively hard to fit into handles. That's why, for example, Hinderer, when Hinderer does its sheep's foot designs, it has to use even different backspacers for its sheep's foot than it does with its other blade designs, because sheep's foot designs are so tall, that blade is so tall, it's hard to fit it on the handle. But they designed this in a way that the blade fails to fit into the handle, and so it scrapes. You combine that with the play pretty much everywhere, and just the fact that there's just a feeling that everything isn't quite tight anytime you use this knife. There's a little bit of ricketiness to it that I can't quite put my finger on. It's certainly it doesn't feel as solid as most knives in carbon fiber tend to feel. It doesn't just quite have that robustness. Again, the play when it's open is noticeable. It's just not the greatest, but that's not even the biggest fit and finish issue. The biggest is the blade grind. And it's the same issue that I had with the Slip 5. It's not as bad here, but it's still pretty bad. This is a slip joint with 110,000 stock that has a tall sheep's foot blade. This thing should be a slicing machine. You take a neutral handle like this, fits nicely in the hand, and your thumb gets nicely on there, or you pinch it just like that. This thing should be an EDC monster right out of the box. You should be able to dice up your packages, even use it a little bit for food prep. You should be able to cut open boxes, slice through, open a bag of sand, even do stuff in the garden super, super easily right out of the box with a blade this thin and this much space to drop. And by the way, the ergonomics, I'm even going to put the ergos. The ergos are neutral, but are solidly on the good end of neutral. Even though this is a neutral handle, it's just the right size, just the right thickness. The chamfers on the handle are nice. And just because of this sheep's foot blade, and because of how well this blade is positioned, how low that edge is, how easy it is to get to that blade and pinch it for the kind of light EDC tasks you would use a slip joint for, stuff where you're holding it in your hand, down on a table, anything like that. The ergos are good. But this blade out of the box was a terrible cutter. And it wasn't even that the edge was fat. The edge bevel was smaller than I would like to see. And given how small it was, I kind of suspected, and you can see even with the grind, it's not quite even. This is 17 degrees per side. The bevel is a tiny bit fatter on one side than the other. This bevel was even smaller than it is now out of the box, so the edge angle was even fatter. But the fact is, This just did not cut well when I got it. It just didn't. And it didn't cut paper well. If I tried on a tomato or a plant or something like that, the edge just wouldn't bite at all. It even struggled going through Amazon tape and stuff like that. Now, when I laid the edge back and gave it a pretty aggressive sharpening, now it cuts okay. It actually cuts, decently well, all considered. If I've got like, your arbitrary piece of paper here and I run it through, it cuts. But 110 thousandths thick slip joint with a tall grind like that should be an elite slicer. That's that's part of the reason you get a knife like this. You want a light, slicey carry. A lightweight knife that doesn't slice well just isn't really good at much of anything. And unfortunately, this falls into that camp. The grind lets this blade down. And so even though this is a very nice blade shape for EDC, it's never been something that I've wanted to pull out and actually use because it just doesn't cut as well as I want a thin sheep's foot blade to cut. To put it another way, the other sheep's foot blade that I've had recently was a Hinderer Skinny, which is 140 thousandths instead of 111 or 110 thousandths, meaning probably 30% thicker on the blade stock. And that Hinderer cuts significantly better than this one does. And as anybody knows, Hinderers are not well known for their cutting performance. The cutting performance on this, disappointing. So, those are the positives, neutrals, and negatives, which brings us to, and we're just trying this out here, let's go right here, the ClarkeScore. Again, a shameless ripoff of Doug DeMuro's Doug Score, 10 categories. I will explain each of the categories as I go. Briefly, I'm going to have a whole video going through sort of how I came up with this scoring methodology and also how I'm normalizing against other knives. I do want this to sort of foster some debate because, it's impossible for me to make a perfect scoring system. There is no perfect scoring system, but I am going to try to be as consistent as I possibly can. We're going to have two buckets here. We're going to have fun factor, and there we've got distinctiveness. Oops, that's actually right on the screen here. We got distinctiveness, we've got design, we've got action, and then we've got fit and finish. And then last but not least, we've got the cool factor. I'll probably write this out beforehand going forward. And then we've got usability. And there we've got cutting. We've got robustness, which really means toughness, but I don't like to use the term toughness because that means something in a steel context. Then we've got carry, and then we've got ergos, which is really ergonomics and feel, and then we've got value. So we've got 10 categories in two buckets. First, and these are all rated 1 to 10. First, distinctiveness. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10, and frankly, it's a pretty high 7. Let me just block this out here. Again, Serge's designs are inherently, let me see if I can scooch this down, there we go. Serge's designs are inherently quite unique. They're quite distinctive. What this really means, distinctiveness, is sort of to what extent does this design stand out? To what extent is this design like nothing else out there? If you want a Serge Panchenko, there's nothing quite like a Serge Panchenko, and this fits that design philosophy very clearly. It's got his aesthetic, it's got his design details, it's got that quirkiness to it. So I want to give it a pretty high score for that. Design here, I'm also going to give that design a 7. None of the issues that I have with this knife come down to design flaws. Like, even this backspacer thing, which I keep mentioning, is not a design flaw. Even this thing with the blade hitting there, you can see if it properly seated and there wasn't a tiny bit of slack in this pivot here when it was closed, it wouldn't be an issue. This blade is designed to fit in this handle. It's just the fit and finish that let it down. Everything here is consistent. It's a simple design. There's nothing mind-blowing. The use of materials is very cool. This is one of my favorite uses of Nebula carbon fiber that I've seen. It just, again, the whole aesthetic kind of goes together. Even the clip fits very nicely with the rest of the knife. It just looks cool. And, you know, it's one of those things where when you look at the close little details, how the screws are finished, you know, how this clip is shaped, how they chose to chamfer this so that the layers of the carbon fiber show through. Even the way that they did the plunge, that sort of curvy way of doing the plunge, the curve of that swedge, you know, Serge's always great looking maker's mark there. There's nothing impressive in a complexity sense about this design, but there's lots of interesting little details. So for executing a pretty simple design competently, it gets a 7. Action, I've gone back and forth. I'm going to give it, and by the way, my scoring system, I am truly using a 1 to 10 on this. Only the very best knives are going to get a 10. Action, I've gone back and forth between a 5 and a 6. Honestly, I feel like it's a 5. And the reason it's a 5, the walk and talk is very nice. But that bit of play on a slip joint is, and especially like the play down here, it just feels a little sloppier. If this was the first slip joint that you picked up, or one of the first slip joints that you picked up, you probably would think that this is a great feeling action, and that's part of the reason I want to bump it up a point. But at the same time, having felt some really good actions, there's just a bit of a mushiness to it that you don't get in very good modern slip joint actions. Like if I compare this, not even just to a Jack Wolf, because Jack Wolfs are like an 8 at least on slip joint action. If I compare this to my Ace Farley I used to have, that had a crisper action than this one. There's just, and again, I think it's the product of that pivot and a little bit of play. There's just a hint of sloppiness in the whole thing. Fit and finish, I think that you can see this one coming. This one, honestly, I'm giving it a 3 in fit and finish. And the fit and finish issues it's not like the whole thing is sloppy. But with that bit of play in the pivot and with this scraping issue on the close, which is really unacceptable and is a really, like that amount of play in the close, both up and down and side to side, is really unacceptable. And it's just the kind of issue that we shouldn't have to deal with in 2024. And at the same time, I also think that I consider the fatness of this blade grind and the poorness of the factory edge to be a bit of a fit and finish issue as well. The fact is, great materials. I mean, the M390 has been fine. It's a slip joint. I haven't put it through its paces. But the fit and finish, the actual construction here, is not doing justice to the design. This is a design that deserves to be pulled off much better than the fit and finish is suggesting here. And the cool factor is going to be another 7. This is a cool looking knife. This is a pretty knife. This is not just, distinctive in the sense that it's very distinctly a Serge design, but this does not, this has a very different vibe and a very interesting vibe and feel and look to it compared to most other slip joints and frankly most other knives on the market. It's got a bit of darkness to it. It's got a bit of moodiness to it. It's just, and it's quite obvious, even as a little closed object, from every angle, it just looks interesting. It's a cool thing to have on your desk. It's a cool thing to have in your pocket. It's a cool thing to hold in your hand. It's fun to have around. Part of why it pains me to give some lower scores to this knife is I really, really want to like it. I want to like all of Serge's designs because Serge seems like a very likable guy as well, but I want to like this knife. This is a fun and cool and interesting knife. So that's why it gets that score there. But, and frankly, it's fun and cool and interesting in the space it's playing. It's still, the reason this is a 7 and not higher, it's still a very basic design. It's still a very basic knife. It's not as cool as, you know, some of the fancier for locking knives that we get out there, or even something like a truly high-end slip joint. It's cool for a $150 slip joint. So a 7 feels right for that. Cutting performance. I've gone back and forth between 5 and 6 on this one. Honestly, I am going to give it a 6 because for my criticism about the grind, which remains valid, this grind sucks. It's still a sheep's foot with 110,000 stock, and once you lay back that edge, once you sharpen it, it cuts well. Like, this will now slice through paper easily. This will now break down boxes easily. This will now do the things that I wish it did out of the box. It's still not an exceptional performer. I've got knives with fatter stock that do just as well as this, and I've got plenty of knives, like any of my Spydercos and frankly, most of my Benchmades, with stock this thick or about this thick will slice better than this one. But it's still just a function of how good this blade shape is for EDC tasks and just the geometry of that blade stock. It does still cut. It's that it could cut so much better than it does. It's frustrating. It's not bad. It's frustrating that it's not better. Robustness, which again really means toughness. I just don't want to use the term toughness because that's so pregnant with meaning in the knife world. I'm going to give that a 4, and honestly it comes down to, one, this is just it's a lightweight design. It's a slip joint. It's not something you're going to want to use for harder use anyway. It's robustness. That's how tough does this knife feel? How hard can you use it? There are limitations to what you can do with a slip joint, even something with a stiffer action like this. Carbon fiber, very tough material to have for the handles. I'm not worried about those handles breaking, but I will say, and this is an opinion that lots of people have held for a long time, anything that's got play like this out of the box, I'm not feeling great about that pivot in the long run. It's just when there are issues like that right away, that kind of slop is the sort of thing that leads this knife to break down over time. And it contributes to this fact of this thing never quite feeling as confident and secure when I was using it, when I was pushing it by slip joint standards. Pushing a slip joint is like pushing it through double wall cardboard and really cranking on it there. Even then, this never felt quite as tough, quite as robust as I wanted it to. And again, we're spoiled in 2024. We're spoiled that most of the knives we have don't have any play. That most of the knives we have feel, at least good knives, feel like locked up. They feel super tight. 4 might be a little harsh. Honestly, a 5 might be justified. But frankly, for a slip joint, I'm okay with a 4. I'm not going to be pushing this. And honestly, when I think about how I've used this, I wouldn't even put this into anything harder than double-walled cardboard with any regular basis. Like, if I've got like a hard branch in the garden, and this is the only knife on me, I'm not going to try to cut through that branch. I'm going to go get another knife. And it's just limiting. Like, that's not the case with a Jack Wolf. If I had a Jack Wolf, and I'm only using Jack Wolf because so many people know about them, if I had a Jack Wolf, I would try to cut through it. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. This one I wouldn't. Carry, I'm going to give a 7. This one's very close to an 8. Again, very light, I'm not even going to say very small, because part of the reason it's only a 7, it's not very small. The Slip 5 was very small. This thing was, teeny tiny. The Slip 5 Slip 7 is comparatively much larger just in its overall footprint because of both the handle and the blade. This one's heavier, but this one is bigger. You do notice this in your pocket, especially because it's so squared off. It's not invisible in the pocket. It also rides a little low. Again, we're spoiled with relatively deep carries these days, but quite a bit of knife sticks up out of your pocket. And even though this is very light, it is more noticeable in the pocket than you would think. I love that these scales are super light. I love the use of carbon fiber here. I'm okay with the use of unlined carbon fiber. And the carry is a 7 because it's still above average just from a nature of the physics of it. But this blocky handle and the overall footprint, I know I made the carry a positive on my previous page, and it is still a positive. It's still great to have a blade in your pocket, but you combine that with the limitations of what it can do, the limitations and capabilities, and even though it's taking up very little space, it doesn't feel like you're getting a ton of knife for that. Like if I want to see a really high carry score, I want something where it takes up no space and it's super capable. This thing just feels like it doesn't take up much space, but it doesn't feel like I'm getting all that capability I want. Ergonomics are a 5. This is as fine ergonomically as ergonomics are going to get. Again, you got the benefit. A sheep's foot blade is just really good for EDC inherently. It's easy to pinch this. It sits naturally in the hand. The chamfers are nice. There's no stupid errors in the ergonomics of this. But it's also just, it's a stick. It's a stick with a sheep's foot blade coming out of it. It's very nice, very easy to do these drag cuts. Very easy to manipulate, climb up the blade, climb down the blade. Back here, even if you press on the spring, it's got enough spring tension that it won't close on you. It's nice. It's fine. But again, if I compare it to your Slip 5 here, the little bit of curve they added to this felt more secure in the hand. This felt like it was trying to do something ergonomically. Even though it gets super skinny up here, the ergonomics weren't that much better. This one probably is only a 6 if this one's a 5, but this one they're at least trying to do something. This one here, it's fine. It's not an issue, but in no way it's a selling point. And frankly, it's not something they're trying to do. It's a very simple ergonomic design. And then the value. So this is a $150 knife. Actually, no, let's keep it at a 5. $150 is cheap enough that this is a 5. I really want to make this a 4. I might end up even making this a 4 when I put it into the database. No, I'm going to make it a 4. Because if I think about it, the comparison that keeps coming in my head for this one, because another slip joint, is the Giant Mouse Ace Farley. The Giant Mouse Ace Farley is made in Italy, and it is $20-30 more expensive than this one. The Giant Mouse Ace Farley has none of the fit and finish issues that I've seen here. And by the way, that price is in either a very nice micarta or brass. So obviously the brass is heavier, but they also made a version in G10. Yes, the materials are arguably a tiny step down compared to fat carbon. But it's a better put together knife. This feels like there are fit and finish issues that we should not still be seeing at $150. It feels a little sloppier than what I would like to see at $150 for a slip joint. Frankly, Spyderco makes some slip joints that are in the ballpark of $150, and they can be tight as a drum. They have none of the fit and finish issues that we've got here. And realistically, if I compare this to what else you can get for $150, yes, you got Serge's distinctive design. Yes, it's super cool, but you're only buying this because it's super cool. There's no functional reason for you to pay $150 for this. If you're not a fan of Serge's design, you're going to feel like you're getting ripped off. So If you add this all up, this is a 29 here in fun factor and a 26 in usability for a total score of 55, which is not great. And this is not a great knife. Unfortunately, this was a knife that I very much wanted to like. Wait, 29. This is a knife that I really, really wanted to like. I love Serge's designs. I love Serge's aesthetics. Serge seems like a fun and genuine dude, and it seems like he is trying. Real Steel let him down on this one, or whoever the OEM is. The fit and finish of this knife is not where it needs to be. This would be a way more interesting knife if, rather than giving this level of quality at $150, they took it one step up, you don't even need to go all the way to a Riot. You can use a Best Tech. You can use I don't know if does slip joints, but use one of the Chinese manufacturers that is one step higher, or even check out Italy and get a knife that is $75 more expensive, but is better made. I think that should be possible in today's market. That will be a much more compelling knife. Frankly, if you added $75 to the price, but you took out the fit and finish issues, gave it a real better grind, and maybe added a little bit more to the handle here in terms of ergonomics, just a little bit more to it, I could easily see, 5, maybe even 10 more points in this score. Just from, honestly, the fit and finish issues are propagating throughout the whole thing. It feels like a very compromised knife. And so that's unfortunately where it ends up. It's cool. I love the way it looks. It's sweet. It's, again, one of the best uses of Nebula fat carbon that I've seen. It just looks so cool. I want to like it. I want to carry it. I've ended up carrying this thing so many times. I've had it on my desk for so long. I've wanted to like it, but I just can't. And so that is my review on the Serge Panchenko Slip 7. You might like it. Just know that if you're buying it and if you're paying $150 for this, know that you're doing it for the design and you're doing it because you like Serge's work and you want to have a Serge. And frankly, if you want to have a Serge, it's worth $150 to you to have another Panchenko in your collection because his work is fun to you. Have at it. Buy it as a toy and as an art piece, because as a user, you're going to find many better uses of your money for $150. Hope you found that helpful. I don't like to rag on knives, but I am going to rag on knives when I think it's justified. That's the only thing that is fair to you guys and gives me some degree of credence and credibility. Obviously, folks can have different opinions. I wouldn't be surprised if some people love this knife without qualification. But I'm just going to draw from my own experience, and this is what my own experience told me. Please let me know what you think of this scoring process. If you do find it helpful, as I get more practice with it, it will come a little bit faster. I'll probably have this set up on the sheet when I get to it, things like that. But I'm planning on building a database of these scores, again, very similar to DeMuro's Doug score, to help people find and see how knives perform at different levels. I know when I was just getting into the knife world, one of the things that I really had to learn, let me just take this page off so we're just looking at the knife. One of the things that I really had to learn was what good cutting performance meant, what a good action meant. I didn't have a basis for comparison. Like, example, going on a slight rant here, my first high-end knife ever was a Hoback Quieback. Those Quiebacks, that was when they were still actually American-made, not that Jake was lying about them being American-made. Those last American-made Quiebacks, the Mark 5.1s, had absurdly good action on bearings. I still wish I could go back and get one for the price that I ended up selling them for. I didn't know that those actions were so good. I didn't know what I was giving up. I started at the top of the pile for bearings actions or darn close to it, and then was disappointed by actions for a couple years after that as I tried other things. Similarly, like on the other extreme, those things don't cut. The Quibacks, they are terrible cutters, and I just didn't know at the time. Like, does this thing, is this what I expect? Should a knife feel like a sponge when I try to cut with it? No. So I'm hoping that as we build out this scoring system, as I assign scores to more knives, it'll both be more helpful on an individual knife basis. And then also as this database gets built out, I'm hoping it'll help answer interesting questions. Like if you've got a $200 budget and you want to find the knives with the best cutting performance, it'll help you do that. If you want to find a knife that is both tough and cuts well, or a knife that is tough but carries well, or you want to find something that has exceptional fit and finish and ergonomics, my hope is that as this database gets built out, it helps answer those questions and helps every individual find knives that they like more quickly and more effectively. It's all going to be based on my own opinion. I hold very strongly that the idea of a neutral and objective review is a farce. Every reviewer both does and ought to put their opinion into the review and judge from their own experience what they believe. I believe that we're in a marketplace of ideas, and if every person tries to give their sincere, personal and first-hand experience, as long as they acknowledge the experiences of others, that will lead to everybody having a better understanding and is more authentic, more useful, and more trustworthy. So these scores are not meant to be objective. They are meant to be based on my experience, which will not be the same as everybody else's. But I do hope they were helpful and become more helpful as we go. That's the end of my rant. That's the end of my review. I hope you have a good day, and I hope that I see you again soon. Comments are welcome down below.